In the dense darkness of the Vatican, a silent battle is brewing, not between enemies, but between the most loyal sons of the Catholic Church. And now that the last breath of an era has just closed, who will open the door to the future? In just a few days, the 2025 Conclave will begin. But what will shake the world is not just the choice of a new pope. That is a much more frightening question. Where will the Catholic Church go? Will it continue to open its arms to welcome change, or will it turn back to close its doors, holding fast to the eternal truth? In the midst of this profound crisis, two names stand out like two opposing mountains. Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, a symbol of mercy and reform, and Raymond Leo, a monument to undying tradition and iron discipline. They do not need to speak because their opposition has echoed throughout the cathedrals, shaking the hearts of millions of believers. And today we will embark on a journey to explore the life of mission in this silent but breathtaking confrontation, where the smallest choice can determine the fate of the entire church in the 21st century. In southern Wisconsin, the name of Cardinal Raymond Leo Burke has long been familiar. Recently, a statement from Mr. Burke about Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle has shocked many believers. There was a time when theological debates in the church were whispered in the dark in Latin. Behind the cold stone walls of the Vatican, they never went beyond the pews. But that time is over. In 2025, the lines are clear. The voices have become strong, sharp. The church is now openly divided between those who desire innovation and those who are determined to preserve tradition. No one represents this opposition more clearly than H. Luis Antonio Tagle and H. Raymond Burke. Even without an official statement from Homie Bird about Homie Tagle, the tension is palpable. Not a personal confrontation, but two souls, two opposing visions of the very nature and future of the church. Two cardinals, one church, two completely different paths. If you have followed the footsteps of the church under Pope Francisco, you will surely know that Cardinal Tagle is a shining voice for mercy, acceptance, and renewal. As for Homie Burke, he is the flag bearer of the movement to defend the traditional faith, who is not afraid to criticize even the Pope who appointed him. They are not enemies, they are opposites. In the silent battle for the soul of the church, this opposition is like an earthquake. Homie Tagle, the pastoral heart of the Church Francisco, is not just a bishop or a theologian. For millions of believers, he is the living heartbeat of Francis's vision of mercy. Homie Burke is the stalwart backbone of tradition, firm, unyielding, and clear. Burke believes that the church must not follow the world, but teach the truth to the world, even when it makes people uneasy. He once warned that mercy without truth is no longer mercy, it is deception. In Homie Burke's eyes, Tagle's openness is a slippery slope, with the risk of distorting doctrine to satisfy temporary emotions. Before we go any further, let us remember that both are faithful sons of the church. They love the church, serve Christ, and want the best for their flock. Therefore, this division is not just a disagreement, but an undercurrent that is stirring the hearts of millions of Catholics around the world. Should we preserve it or renew it? Should we guard or welcome? Should we discipline or accompany? There are no social media posts. There are no interviews that deceive, no public criticisms. Because Homie Burke never mentioned Cardinal Tagle by name. But every time he warned about false mercy, every time he spoke about doctrinal confusion, the shadow of H.T. Girl seemed to echo in every word. On the other side, Homie Tagle has never publicly attacked Homie Burke. He quietly continues his mission, continues to soothe wounds, warm hearts according to the call of Pope Francis. That silence is not indifference, but a choice, a way of fighting with vision, not with hostility. But in that silence, millions of believers are still wavering because those two directions, those two calls are competing for the heart of the church. Homie Burke calls for a return to traditional doctrine with its eternal and unchangeable truth. Homie Tagle calls for a step toward the world, to listen more deeply, to lead more gently, to innovate more courageously. This is not a battle between good and evil. It is a confrontation between two different understandings of fidelity. Both claim to be faithful to the same source of spiritual tradition. That is the tension that Catholics clearly feel every time they attend Mass, every time they go to confession, every time they study catechism. And that unease will only increase in the coming days as the Church prepares to enter a fateful moment, the selection of the next pope. Analysts of the papal succession from Political Newsweek to Catholic media outlets agree that Cardinals BK and Tagle represent the two leading figures in the two major factions shaping the next phase of the Catholic Church. Homie Tagle appears on almost every list of potential papal candidates as a continuation of Pope Francis' reformist spirit. Meanwhile, Homie BK, once ousted from key positions in the Vatican, is now hailed as the most eloquent voice for conservative Catholicism. Homie Tagle represents reform. Homie BK represents resistance. The next pope will be a sign of which path the Church is willing to take. As Catholic Herald in 2025 noted, this is no longer speculation, it is recognition. These two cardinals are not simply leaders, they have become symbols. When Pope Francis went to God, the voice of Raymond Leo Burke finally spoke. What he expressed was neither an apology nor a retreat, but more shocking. It revealed a man still wrestling with his conscience and still committed to the Church. For more than a decade, Homie BG was the most vocal opposition voice in the Catholic hierarchy. A staunch traditionalist, he repeatedly challenged Pope Francis on controversial issues, ranging from blessing same-sex couples to allowing divorced and remarried people to receive communion, reforming the death penalty, and the structure of the Church's governing council. The conflict came to a head in 2014 when Pope Francis removed Cardinal York from his position as the Supreme Court's apostolic nuncio. Years later, he stripped him of his housing and financial rights at the Vatican. He publicly declared Homie Burke a source of division. To many, Homie Burke became the face of the conservative movement against reform. To others, he was a custodian of sacred tradition. And now, following the death of Pope Francis, Homie BK has broken his silence. Contrary to media expectations, Cardinal K's remarks were neither triumphalist nor toxic, nor tinged with regret. On the contrary, they were full of personal reflection and were striking in their humility. He clearly acknowledged that the Pope did not want him to hold any leadership position, but he also affirmed that I do not consider him an enemy, and I am not his enemy. For someone who was once considered a rival of the Pope, the Cardinal's tone was now one of profound respect. He stressed that his actions had never been motivated by hatred or opposition, but by something higher, conscience. Homie Bear said that when faith and doctrine are threatened, silence is not love. Silence is betrayal. The reaction to his confession was immediate. Conservatives praised his unwavering steadfastness. One layperson wrote that he defended the truth even when it was unpopular. Progressives are shocked by the lack of remorse. One theologian wrote on social media, having gone through it all without a trace of remorse. Neutrals are torn between admiration and concern. He loves the Church, but at what cost to unity? The admission does not heal the rift, but it does clarify BK's position and remind the world that the debates under Francis have never been merely political. They are spiritual battles for the soul of the Catholic Church. What Cardinal BK expressed was not simply an observation. It was a hook that showed where the Church stands and where it might be going. His words revealed three undeniable truths. The Church is deeply divided. Today there are two ways of living the faith. One side aims for tolerance, adaptation, and pastoral flexibility. The other side clings to doctrinal clarity, defined boundaries, and unchanging truth. Homie BK represents the latter and refuses to back down. To be opposed does not mean to be incompatible. Burke did not abandon the Church. He did not rebel. He remained even when rejected. For BK, that is true loyalty. The next pontificate will be decisive. Will the next pope continue the reforms of Pope Francis, or will he restore a more traditional tone? BK's words are both a warning and a call to unite like-minded people. Remember a time when bishops and cardinals were not media figures, but guardians of truth, guardians of tradition, guardians of faith. Men who did not bow to the changing winds of the world, but stood firm like pillars of rock in the midst of storms. Homie Raymond Leo Burke was one of those few men, a figure both respected and controversial, but never faded from the flow of church history. Cardinal Burke's career was not simply a story of noble titles. It was a story of tireless perseverance. In an age when silence was often easier than speaking, Homie Burke chose the path of the papacy. This was the journey of a man who used canon law as a weapon, tradition as a compass, and faith as a call. From a Wisconsin farm boy, Raymond Burke stepped into the highest court of the Vatican. Born on June 30th, 1948 in Richland Center, Wisconsin, Burke grew up in a large Catholic family. His childhood was intertwined with faith, the fields, and the labor that required his hands. Like many American boys of that time, his life revolved around church, family meals, and Sunday duties. However, it was clear from early on that this young boy had a calling that extended far beyond the borders of the American Midwest. He attended Holy Cross Minor Seminary, continued at the Catholic University of America, and finally the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, the cradle of many of the Church's most brilliant minds. A fateful moment shaped BK's future when he was ordained a priest by Pope Paul VI himself in St. Peter's Basilica on June 29, 1975, a beginning that many could only dream of. Cardinal Burke did not pursue power, he pursued precision. After serving at St. Joseph Cathedral, working and teaching religion at Aquinas High School, he returned to Rome in 1980 to complete his doctorate in canon law. This was not a simple journey, but a spiritual and intellectual marathon. Homie BG not only completed it, but also excelled. By 1984, he had returned to La Crosse and was appointed diocesan coordinator and vice-chancellor of the Seal. But just 5 years later, a major turning point came. In 1989, he was appointed guardian of marriages at the Supreme Apostolic Signatura, the Vatican's highest court. Notably, he was the first American in history to hold the position. Homie BK had risen from the fields of his homeland to the heart of Vatican power with his iron discipline, deep knowledge, and absolute loyalty to the faith. In 1994, Pope John Paul II appointed Burke as Bishop of La Crosse. The ordination took place on May 6, 1995. From the very beginning, Homie BK showed that he was not a bishop of the times. He founded the Shrine of Our Lady of Guadalupe, embraced traditional Catholic groups, and promoted the Latin Mass of the Trinity before it was allowed to be popularized. H. Burke emphasized solemnity, fidelity, and beauty in the liturgy. Many criticized him for his rigidity, but to his supporters, he was the embodiment of righteousness and justice. Homie Burke went beyond liturgy, raising teacher salaries, emphasizing Catholic education, and promoting charitable work. His leadership was complex, passionate, and divisive. But one thing is undeniable. BK never half-heartedly accepted. In 2003, he was appointed Archbishop of St. Louis, a much larger and more challenging diocese. Homie Burke stepped into a wild field of modern problems, from vocation shortages to cultural pressures. He did what many would not dare. He took canon law seriously. He refused to give communion to politicians who support abortion. He denounced moral relativism. In a shocking move, he excommunicated the parish council of Stanislaw. After a fierce dispute over ownership and management. There were lawsuits, but also loud applause. He did not back down. To his critics, he was a hardline conservative. To his supporters, he was a spiritual general ready to fight for the soul of the Church. In 2008, Pope Benedict XVI appointed Cardinal BK as the Supreme Court Justice of the Apostolic Signatura, the equivalent of the Vatican Supreme Court Justice. For 6 years, he resolved canonical disputes, defended church teaching, and upheld spiritual justice. In 2010, Burke was made a cardinal, a public confirmation of his influence and the trust the Vatican placed in him. He served in several important Vatican departments, from the Congregation for Bishops to the Congregation for Divine Worship to the Congregation for the causes of saints. Burke quickly became an intellectual pillar of the traditionalist Catholic movement worldwide. But times changed. After Pope Francis was elected in 2013, the role of cardinal began to decline. He voiced concerns about the ambiguity in some teachings, especially the apostolic exhortation Amoris Laeti, regarding the admission of divorced and remarried people to communion. BG frankly sent letters and written formal questions asking the Pope to clarify his position. Pope Francis did not respond. In 2014, Cardinal YG was removed from the Supreme Court and transferred to the position of Grand Master of the Order of Malta, an honorary position with no real power. For many, it was akin to exile. In 2023, Pope Francisco made another cold decision. The revocation of the Cardinal's Vatican apartment and pension has shocked both his supporters and his opponents. But the Cardinal is undaunted, calling it a sacrifice he is willing to make for the sake of the truth. Today, Bo is the center of attraction for millions of Catholics, especially those who love the traditional Latin Massachusetts. For them, he is a hero, a man who stood firm when many others were wavering. For others, he is a divisive figure, a blocker of pastoral reform. But no one can deny his influence. Burke is still a regular at Catholic conferences, a top interviewee for leading media outlets, and a living symbol of fidelity to the unadulterated doctrine. He has also been cardinal priest of San Agatha de Godi since 2021, maintaining his position in the College of Cardinals and in the global leadership of the Church. Ahead of the 2025 Conclave, the Vatican is breathing heavily. A decision will be made that will not only shape a new era, but could determine the fate of the Church for generations to come. We are entering a historic moment, where silence is also a warning, where every glance, every vote, could change the course of the global Catholic faith. But the most frightening question remains. Will the Church choose to move forward with the world, or stand firm in the storm and defend the eternal truth? Let us take a deeper look into what is happening behind the closed doors of the Vatican, where the future is being written in silence.